I want you to imagine, just for a moment, that you have been tasked with building a political system entirely from scratch.
Right.
You are standing on an empty factory floor.
Right.
And you are not approaching this task as a philosopher debating the innate moral virtues or, the fundamental flaws of humanity.
You're an engineer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're approaching it strictly as an engineer
Mm-hmm.
tasked with designing a highly complex, interconnected machine.
Yeah.
Because if a machine on a factory floor is consistently breaking down, producing defective parts, or actively endangering the operators, you do not stand there and blame the gears for being morally corrupt.
Yeah, of course not.
You do not ask the pulleys to search their souls, read a few ethics books, and try harder to be good. You look at the blueprints, you identify the systemic flaws, the bad incentives, the points of excessive friction, and you fix the design.
And that is precisely the framework we are exploring today. We are looking at political behavior not as a series of individual moral failings or some sudden collapse of societal ethics. We are looking at it as the predictable, almost mathematical outcome of the rules that currently govern the system.
Right.
Because if a system rewards a specific type of negative behavior with absolute power, it is mathematically guaranteed that the system will be flooded with individuals willing to execute that behavior.
Mm-hmm.
When you change the architecture, when you change the underlying rules of the game, you inevitably change the behavior of the players.
So welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission today is an exhaustive, unhurried exploration of the 7th University Lecture delivered by Professor Wojciech.
We have a substantial stack of his source materials in front of us today.
We do. We have his presentation slides, his mathematical models, and the audio transcripts. And together, these documents form a highly rigorous, mathematically structured blueprint for an entirely new architecture of political organizations. We are going to unpack how strict, precisely calculated rules can be used to engineer the behavior of political parties, movements, and non-governmental organizations.
And we're going to take our time with this. We will be analyzing Professor Hinshenk's concepts impartially, looking purely at the mechanics of his proposals. I mean, this is really a detailed conversation about how organizational rules dictate outcomes in statecraft.
Yeah.
We want to understand the negative feedback loops, the financial traps, and the behavioral incentives he has designed to mechanically curb political corruption and inefficiency. We will test these rules, look for the loopholes, and examine how they would function in the real world.
So get comfortable, settle in. Let's look at the first major structural flaw the professor identifies in our modern political architecture. Okay, let's unpack this. The concept of the catch-all party.
Right, the catch-all party.
According to Professor Yink, modern political parties have largely ceased to function as ideological organizations. He describes them, quite pointedly actually, as clientelist machines.
Yeah, that's the core of his critique.
They have become organizations entirely devoid of real, actionable ideology. They are designed simply to throw a piece of meat to every conceivable demographic just to secure enough votes to gain power. But what does that actually look like in practice? I mean, how did we get here?
Well, the critique here is deeply rooted in historical context. If we look back a century or even just several decades, political parties typically had a clear, defining profile.
These stood for something specific.
Exactly. Social Democrats advocated for the expansion of the welfare state and labor rights. Conservatives championed traditional social values and institutional stability. Liberals focused on individual autonomy and free market economics. Whether you agreed with them or not, you knew what the organization stood for. If you voted for a party, you were endorsing a specific, cohesive vision for the future of the state. But over the last several decades, as mass media evolved and political polling really became a science, the catch-all model became the globally dominant strategy. A catch-all party attempts to promise everything to everyone simultaneously.
Which sounds fundamentally contradictory.
Yes.
I mean, how can an organization realistically promise to lower taxes for the wealthy business owner, drastically increase social spending for the working class, maintain strict traditional values for the social conservative, and champion radical social change for the progressive? It just defies basic logic.
It does defy logic, and that is exactly why it requires a specific type of organizational structure to survive. By trying to be everything, the catch-all party effectively stands for nothing other than the acquisition of power itself.
The ideology is hollowed out.
It is hollowed out and replaced by marketing. And because there is no cohesive philosophical program holding the organization together, the structure of the party inevitably mutates. The professor points out that these catch-all parties rely almost exclusively on a single, heavily marketed, charismatic leader.
Yes, the leader becomes the entire brand.
Exactly. This leader is presented not as a champion of a specific ideology, but as a universal savior. They are positioned as the single solution to every citizen's individual problems.
But beneath that charismatic figurehead, the actual machinery of the party functions less like a policy-making body and more like a massive informal employment agency.
A patronage network.
Right. When the professor says they feudalize the state ministries, think of it like a hostile corporate takeover. The winning party treats a vital state institution, let's say the Ministry of Education or the Ministry of Transportation, not as a public service, but as a giant piñata full of taxpayer cash and administrative jobs. And they just start handing out the candy to anyone wearing their party's T-shirt. Which brings us to the concept of the party soldier.
Yes, the party soldier model is the direct mechanical consequence of this clientelist system. Because the party has no unifying ideology to inspire genuine voluntary sacrifice, it must secure loyalty through material reward.
It buys loyalty.
It creates a vast network of local managers and party soldiers on the ground. These are individuals whose primary motivation for participating in politics is not a vision for national development, but the promise of personal advancement.
Yeah.
When the party attains power and executes that hostile takeover of the state apparatus we just talked about, they proceed to extract resources. They direct lucrative state contracts to party-affiliated firms without proper competitive procedures, and they distribute public sector jobs to their loyal party soldiers, regardless of their actual competence or qualifications for the role.
It is a pure patronage system. You join the party not because you believe in a cohesive program for the country's economic or social development, but because it is quite literally the most viable mechanism for securing a job, a promotion, or a financial favor in your town. And the professor argues that this is inherently corrupt, but again, he views it as an engineering problem. The thousands of people involved in this machine are not necessarily doing this because they inherently desire to be corrupt actors. They are doing it because the structural incentives of the system demand it for their own economic survival and advancement.
Yes, exactly.
If the only way to get a job as a school principal is to carry a party membership card, people will carry the card.
The behavior is entirely rational within the context of a broken system. So how does the professor propose to fix this machine? In his blueprint, a political party in a well-engineered system must be fundamentally redefined by law. It cannot legally survive on the charisma of a single leader, and it cannot function as a patronage network.
It needs a real foundation.
It must have a comprehensive society-wide program for development. It must stand for a holistic vision that it attempts to implement whenever it participates in the executive or legislative branches. But the professor understands that merely writing a law stating that a party should have a program is entirely insufficient.
Words on paper do not change behavior.
Never. The underlying rules, the financial mechanics, and the negative feedback loops must relentlessly enforce this reality.
Which brings us to the actual financial mechanics of his blueprint. The professor introduces a concept that essentially forces members to have actual, painful skin in the game. In his proposed system, members of a political party are legally required to pay a mandatory membership fee.
But it is not a flat rate.
No, it is not like tossing a $5 bill in a donation jar once a year. It is a strict, recurring deduction of exactly 1% of their monthly salary.
This is a critical foundational adjustment to the architecture. By tying membership to a strict percentage of an individual's livelihood, you immediately change the psychological nature of the commitment. In the current system, where membership fees are practically non-existent, or they are voluntarily ignored, or even paid for by wealthy donors on behalf of ghost members, individuals can join a party entirely passively. They sign a paper, their name goes on a list, and they hope to eventually reap a favor or a job down the line. It costs them absolutely nothing to be a dormant party soldier.
But let me play devil's advocate here for a moment. Doesn't a mandatory financial fee just mean that only the rich will be able to afford to participate in politics? Doesn't a strict financial requirement effectively lock out the working class or those on fixed incomes from having a voice in the democratic process?
That is precisely why the rule is structured as a percentage rather than a flat standardized fee. 1% of a minimum wage salary is a very small absolute number, just as 1% of a corporate executive salary is a very large absolute number.
Okay, I see.
But proportionally, the financial sacrifice feels identical to both citizens. It ensures the millionaire and the factory worker feel the exact same level of personal financial commitment to the organization. If membership costs you 1% of your income every single month, month after month, year after year, it relentlessly weeds out those passive members.
You really have to believe in it.
You are only going to part with that money if you are genuinely ideologically committed to the party's actual political program. It makes party membership a deliberate, continuous financial sacrifice rather than a free lottery ticket for potential patronage.
So we have established how the individual citizen interacts with the party financially. But that financial rigor extends heavily to the organizations themselves when it comes time for an election. The professor outlines a massive financial deposit that a party must place simply to put a candidate on a ballot. So if I want to start a new political party tomorrow, I cannot just print some flyers, make a charismatic speech in the town square, and demand to be put on the ballot. I have to put down a serious deposit. How much are we actually talking about here? Walk me through the mechanics of this barrier to entry.
The barrier to entry is deliberately high, and it is governed by a strict mathematical formula. The electoral deposit is calculated as 0.0001 multiplied by the average personal income in that specific electoral district.
Okay.
And then that number is multiplied by the total number of registered voters in that district.
Yeah.
This means the financial barrier is directly and inextricably tied to the current economic reality and the exact demographic weight of the constituency the party wishes to represent.
Let's translate that into a real-world scenario so we can really grasp the scale. The professor uses the city of Novi Sad in his source material. Let's walk through that example. To give our global audience some context, the source uses 120,000 dinars as the average local monthly income in Novi Sad. And for the sake of understanding the scale, 120,000 dinars represents roughly a standard, solid, middle-class monthly wage in that specific region. It is not poverty wages, and it is not millionaire wealth. It is the regional benchmark for a normal, comfortable living.
Right.
So if the average income is 120,000 dinars and the city has 350,000 registered voters, how does the math play out?
We apply the formula. You take the average income of 120,000 and you multiply it by the 350,000 registered voters. That gives you a massive base number representing the total economic and demographic weight of the city.
Wow.
Then you multiply that base by the 0.0001 constant. The result is an electoral deposit of exactly 4.2 million dinars just for that single local municipal election.
That is a highly significant sum of money just to secure a spot on a local ballot. And if we scale that up to a national parliamentary election, the numbers become truly formidable. If the national average income across the entire republic is slightly lower, let's say 70,000 dinars, but there are 6 million registered voters nationwide, the formula demands a deposit of 42 million dinars.
Precisely. And the systemic implication here is profound. Under this architecture, a political party cannot simply emerge overnight, ride a brief wave of populist anger, make a few charismatic television appearances, and jump onto the ballot to roll the dice on an election.
No, the math doesn't allow it.
To raise 42 million dinars, an organization must have serious, sustained financial backing. And remember our previous rule. In this system, that backing does not come from a handful of shadowy billionaires writing blank checks. It comes primarily from the steady, verifiable 1% monthly salary contributions of its dedicated citizen members.
So it requires deep organizational capability, years of long-term planning, and a genuinely committed, dues-paying base of grassroots supporters before they can even attempt to contest an election. You cannot fake that level of organization.
Right, I really can't.
But here's where the blueprint gets truly brilliant. Because simply placing a 42 million dinar deposit is only half the equation. The party naturally wants that money back after the election is over. Otherwise, they would be bankrupt within a single election cycle.
This brings us to the core engineering mechanism of the entire blueprint, the negative feedback loop. In systems engineering, a negative feedback loop is a mechanism that automatically counteracts deviations from an optimal state, stabilizing the entire system.
Like a thermostat.
Exactly like the thermostat in your house. You set it to 70 degrees. If the room gets too hot, the thermostat senses the deviation and actively pushes back, turning on the air conditioning to cool it down. If a system starts producing too much of something, the loop pushes back to reduce it. Professor Ank uses this exact mathematical concept to entirely dismantle the party-army model we discussed earlier.
Right. So how does this thermostat work in politics? The party wants its massive 42 million dinar deposit returned. But the professor's blueprint introduces a staggering condition for getting that money back. The electoral deposit is only returned to the party if their candidate wins 15 times more votes than the party has registered members in that specific electoral district.
Let's take a moment to really unpack the behavioral consequence of this 15 times multiplier, because it is the engine that drives the behavioral change. Under the old broken clientelist model, a party's primary goal was to hoard as many members as humanly possible. We see historical examples in the source materials of regional parties boasting 700,000 official members. They want a massive, bloated army of party soldiers on the books to mobilize for guaranteed votes, to intimidate rivals, and to justify the distribution of state patronage. They want the biggest list possible.
But under Professor Inking's rules, hoarding members becomes an immediate, fatal liability.
Yes.
Let's do the math on that and build a hypothetical scenario. Imagine a corrupt, old-school, local politician. Let's call him Mayor Bob. Mayor Bob operates under the old system. He runs his local party like a mob boss. He has hired 5,000 ghost workers. These are people who do nothing but hold a party card and collect a small public paycheck, just to pad his party's official membership list and look powerful.
Right.
But suddenly, Professor Inking's new architecture is implemented. Bob's party accountant comes running into his office, sweating profusely. What does the accountant tell him?
The accountant says, Bob, because you insisted on keeping those 5,000 ghost workers on our official membership rolls, the new 15 times multiplier rule has triggered. In order to get our multi-million dinar deposit back and avoid total bankruptcy, we now need to win 75,000 votes in this town.
75,000.
But Bob, there are only 50,000 registered voters in the entire municipality. You have mathematically bankrupted the party.
It is a mathematical impossibility. By hoarding those 5,000 patronage members, Mayor Bob guaranteed the financial destruction of his own organization.
Therefore, the system mechanically forces every political party to radically and instantly change its internal behavior. To ensure they can realistically hit that 15 times multiplier and survive financially, parties must actively and ruthlessly purge their own membership rolls.
They have to kick people out.
They must intentionally keep their official membership incredibly small, lean, and highly active. As a party organizer, you only want members who are genuinely essential to the hard work of organizing, strategizing, and campaigning. You cannot afford to keep thousands of passive ghost members on the books just to inflate your ego or hand out municipal favors. It completely destroys the underlying incentive structure that created the patronage-based party army in the first place.
It effectively transforms the political party from a bloated, corrupt employment agency back into a concentrated, highly motivated ideological organization. The fat is entirely trimmed away by the math.
Yes.
But of course, human nature being what it is, people will try to cheat. Bob and I tried to keep two sets of books. One public list of 100 members to get the easy multiplier, and a secret shadow list of 5,000 members for his patronage network. How does the blueprint prevent that?
What's fascinating here is the strict rules regarding absolute public accountability. In this system, the official membership list of every political party must be strictly public at all times. There are no secret shadow lists. The public ledger must include the member's first and last name and their year of birth, which is necessary to differentiate between citizens who might share a common name.
Okay.
Anyone, a journalist, a rival party, an ordinary citizen, anyone can look up the exact membership of any political organization.
But wait, let me push back on that. A fully public membership list. Doesn't that raise massive privacy concerns? What if I join a progressive party but I work for a deeply conservative boss? Won't my boss just look up my name on the public registry and fire me or deny me a promotion? Aren't we inviting discrimination by forcing people to publicly declare their political allegiance?
That is a very valid concern, and it represents a deliberate trade-off in the architecture. The blueprint prioritizes systemic integrity over absolute political privacy. Yes, there is a risk of social friction. However, the logic is that if you are deeply committed enough to a comprehensive society-wide program to sacrifice 1% of your income every month, you must be willing to stand behind that conviction publicly.
Right.
Furthermore, this transparency is the only way to allow the state control organs to audit the system. The state regulators have access to the full, unredacted lists, which include the personal identification numbers. In the source material's regional context, this is the JMBG, which is essentially the regional equivalent of a U.S. Social Security number or a UK national insurance number, as well as residential addresses.
So the state uses those unique identification numbers to run an automated cross-check.
Precisely. The state rigorously audits the entire system to enforce another critical rule. A citizen can legally only be a member of one single political party at a time.
I see.
Under the old system, a cynical citizen might hedge their bets. They might join Party A, Party B, and Party C, paying tiny flat fees to all of them, hoping that whichever one wins power will give them a municipal job. The automated cross-check of the JMBG makes plural membership impossible. You must choose one ideological program, pay your 1% monthly fee, and have your affiliation known publicly.
It demands an exceptional, uncompromising level of civic transparency. You are placing your name, your reputation, and your financial resources behind a specific vision for the country, and you are doing so in the public square.
You really have to commit.
Okay. We have thoroughly mapped out the architecture of how a party operates, how it gets onto the ballot, and how the negative feedback loops force it to maintain a lean membership.
Right.
Let's transition to the rules governing the representatives once they actually survive this gauntlet, win an election, and take office.
This is where the blueprint shifts its focus to address the stability and integrity of the legislative and executive branches. Let's look at the legislative branch first. The members of parliament, or the municipal assembly members. A frequent, highly corrosive issue in many parliamentary systems is the outright trading or selling of political mandates.
Right, switching teams.
Exactly. An MP is elected under the banner of Party A. The voters supported the platform of Party A, but halfway through their term, the government majority is razor thin. Party B realizes they need just 2 more votes to seize control of the parliament. So they approach our MP from Party A, and perhaps through promises of future cabinet positions, lucrative board memberships, or outright bribery, they convince that MP to switch sides.
It happens all the time. The MP crosses the floor, the balance of power shifts entirely, and the will of the voters who elected Party A is completely subverted without a single ballot being cast. It is incredibly frustrating for the electorate.
It is.
Now, the obvious solution seems simple. If you leave the party you were elected with, you immediately lose your seat, and your party gets to appoint a replacement. But the professor notes that this is legally highly problematic. International agreements, specifically rigorous European Union democratic standards, often explicitly dictate that the political mandate belongs entirely to the individual human representative, not to the abstract corporate entity of the party. The party cannot own the seat.
That is correct. Under those international frameworks, you cannot easily construct a legal mechanism to forcibly strip an elected MP of their seat simply because they had a change of conscience or defected. To solve this complex legal puzzle, the professor introduces a brilliant, highly nuanced mechanism called the frozen button.
The frozen button. How does this thread the needle between international law and preventing bribery?
Well, the frozen button rule dictates that if a member of parliament voluntarily leaves their party, or if they behave so egregiously that they are formally expelled from their party during their term, they do not lose their physical seat in the parliament. They are not fired from the legislature.
Okay.
They physically remain in the assembly. They retain their full constitutional right to discuss legislation, to debate on the floor, to ask questions of the prime minister, and to advocate for their constituents. However, the moment they are no longer affiliated with their original party, they completely and permanently lose their right to vote on any legislation. Their electronic voting button on their desk is effectively frozen for the remainder of their term.
That is absolutely fascinating. I want to process the psychology of that for a moment. It elegantly respects the international standard. The individual MP keeps their mandate, their salary, and their voice. But it completely neutralizes the corrupt transactional incentive for another party to buy them off. Let's go back to Party B trying to seize control. Why in the world would Party B offer a lucrative bribe or a shadow cabinet position to an MP from Party A if that defector can no longer cast a vote to help Party B pass laws or form a government? The trading value of that specific human being drops to absolute zero overnight.
Precisely. The defector goes from being the most powerful, courted person in the room to being a ghost in the machine. They can speak, but they cannot influence the mathematics of power. It perfectly preserves the right of free speech while destroying the market for mandate trading. And the consequences for defection extend far beyond the assembly floor. The architecture imposes severe penalties for instability. If a legislative representative leaves their party, or if an executive official like a government minister or a city mayor leaves their party, they face a strict 5-year ban from active participation in political life.
5 years. That is an eternity in politics.
For an executive official, leaving the party results in immediate dismissal from their post, followed by the ban. They cannot run for office, they cannot hold appointed positions, and they are exiled from the arena for half a decade. This enforces extreme, unyielding discipline. It ensures that representatives remain bound to the comprehensive program they were actually elected to implement.
Right.
If you fundamentally disagree with your party, you can leave, but you will pay a massive professional price, which ensures defection is a matter of absolute ultimate conscience, not a matter of casual career advancement.
But while discipline is enforced for the standard representatives, the rules for the absolute highest offices in the land take this concept of separation to the absolute extreme. Explicitly, the professor highlights a crucial, unbending rule for the top brass. The moment a person is elected to the office of the President of the Republic or the office of the Supreme State Controller, they must immediately resign from their political party. And this resignation is not a temporary leave of absence while they hold office. It is a permanent severance. It is for life.
This is perhaps the most profound structural shift in the entire blueprint. In our current reality, it is incredibly common for a president to maintain deep, active ties to their political party. In many systems, they remain the formal, acting leader of the party even while holding the presidency.
Which creates a massive conflict.
It creates a massive structural distortion. The head of state is supposed to be the unifying figurehead representing all citizens equally. But if they are still the party boss, they inevitably spend their time actively campaigning for local candidates, directing state resources toward partisan goals, and using the majesty of the presidency to crush rival parties.
Under Professor Ng's blueprint, the second they take the oath of office, their partisan affiliation is permanently severed. They surrender their membership card and they can never again be a member of any political organization for the rest of their natural life.
Yes, and he connects this to the broader, older philosophy of statecraft. The highest offices must serve the state mechanism as a whole. They must be completely untethered from the obligations, the owed favors, and the bitter tribalism of daily partisan politics. A president who owes nothing to a party boss can act with genuine independence.
Let me push back, though. Does a president really just forget their party? If a lifelong conservative politician becomes president and resigns their membership, aren't they still going to quietly pull strings for the conservative party behind closed doors?
Yeah.
You can take the politician out of the party, but can you take the party out of the politician?
You cannot erase their personal philosophy, no. But you can systematically isolate them from the machinery of reward and punishment. If they are permanently banned from rejoining, the party has no leverage over them. They cannot be threatened with losing their party leadership because they already gave it up.
That makes sense.
And importantly, this lifelong separation is sustained even after their term ends. Former presidents and Supreme State controllers do not return to the political arena to act as shadow leaders or highly paid partisan lobbyists. Instead, their post-term life is reserved for a specialized Senate council.
A Senate council, what is their function there?
In this council, they cannot publicly engage in daily partisan squabbles or campaign for candidates, but they are permanently available to offer institutional memory and high-level advice to the current government on critical, nonpartisan state matters. Things like complex international treaties, constitutional crises, or national security emergencies. It ensures a continuity of state knowledge that sits comfortably above the chaotic fray of electoral politics.
It is a remarkable, elegant way to enforce the genuine neutrality of the state's highest guardians. Okay, we have thoroughly mapped out the architecture of political parties. The strict fees, the massive deposits, the 15 times multiplier, the frozen buttons, and the lifetime bans. But here's where it gets really interesting. Professor Ng does not believe that parties are the only valid way for citizens to organize. He introduces a completely separate, distinct class of organization into the blueprint, the political movement. In his engineered system, there is a strict, legally enforced structural difference between a party and a movement.
It is vital we define this because currently the terms are practically meaningless. They are used interchangeably. A group of ambitious politicians might call themselves a movement simply for marketing purposes because it sounds more grassroots, revolutionary, and less corrupt than calling themselves a party.
Right, it's just branding.
Exactly. But structurally, they operate exactly like a traditional catch-all party. They run candidates in every district, they try to win general executive power, and they want to distribute jobs. The professor's blueprint ends the semantic ambiguity immediately. A political movement is defined strictly by its limited scope and its predetermined lifespan.
So if a party must have a comprehensive society-wide program for everything from tax law to military defense, what is a movement?
A movement is strictly temporary, and it must be laser-focused on one single, clearly defined, measurable goal. It is legally prohibited from having a comprehensive platform for governing the entire society. It exists to accomplish one specific task and absolutely nothing else.
The source materials provide some excellent grounded examples of this. A movement might be formed on a national level with the sole exclusive objective of changing a specific clause in the national constitution.
Or on a local level.
Right. Or, on a smaller scale, a movement could be formed locally with the sole goal of preventing a developer from bulldozing a specific nature reserve, or demanding the construction of a regional highway between two neglected towns, or forcing the municipality to install a modern sewer system in a specific neighborhood.
Because the movement is designed around a single, highly measurable goal, like either the sewer is built or it is not, it inherently comes with an expiration date. A movement dissolves the absolute moment its stated goal is achieved. If the ribbon is cut on the new highway, the movement instantly ceases to exist as a legal entity.
It just vanishes.
But it also has a predetermined hard time limit built into its founding charter. When a group of citizens files the paperwork to found the movement, they might declare, "We exist to advocate for this environmental regulation, and our operational lifespan is exactly 10 years. If 10 years pass and the regulation has not been adopted, the movement automatically dissolves."
That is a brutal mechanism. Why force them to dissolve if they haven't won yet?
The engineering logic is ruthless but necessary. If the public has not supported the goal sufficiently within a decade of campaigning, the movement has objectively failed in its mission. If it is allowed to exist forever without achieving its goal, it will inevitably mutate.
Like the parties did.
Exactly. The organizers will start focusing on paying their own salaries, renting nice offices, and maintaining their status as activists rather than actually solving the problem. The automatic dissolution prevents a temporary cause from becoming a permanent, resource-draining institution.
This laser focus on a single issue creates a truly unique opportunity for the average citizen. Because a movement does not demand total, unquestioning ideological alignment across all aspects of human society, the rules allow a citizen to legally join up to two movements simultaneously.
Which makes perfect sense from a systemic perspective and highlights the difference between a party and a movement. Joining two catch-all parties is a massive conflict of interest because they are directly competing to manage the entire state apparatus.
You can't be in both.
No. But joining a movement to change the national constitution does not conflict in any way with joining a completely separate local movement to build a sewer system in your city. You can passionately support both specific goals without any logical contradiction. And notice how the systemic allowance actively discourages the bitter us versus them tribalism of traditional party politics.
Right. I could be in a local movement advocating for a new high school alongside my neighbor, even if my neighbor and I fundamentally disagree on national tax policy and belong to completely different political parties. We can collaborate on a specific, pragmatic goal without having to endorse each other's entire worldview. It creates space for genuine, issue-based cooperation.
Exactly. And just like parties, movements have their own specific financial mechanics, but they are proportionally scaled down to reflect their temporary, highly focused nature. The mandatory financial commitment for a movement member is halved. Instead of the 1% required for a party, a movement member pays a 0.5% monthly salary deduction.
Okay, that makes it more accessible.
And the electoral deposit required to put a movement-backed candidate on the local ballot is also smaller, using a 0.00005 multiplier in the formula instead of 0.00001.
However, the true genius of the movement's design lies in a mechanism I can only describe as a brilliant time trap. It is built into the negative feedback loop for getting their deposit returned. Recall that parties must win a flat 15 times their membership to get their massive deposit back. For a movement, the multiplier is not static. It is a dynamic equation.
Yes, this is key.
The multiplier is calculated by taking the number of members in the district and multiplying it by the number of years remaining on the movement's defined lifespan. I want to spend some real time on this because it is heavy math, but it is incredibly clever. Let's build a scenario.
Let's illustrate the time trap. Suppose a group of passionate citizens forms a movement to push for a major regional recycling initiative. When they file the papers, they declare a 10-year lifespan. We give ourselves a decade to get this done. Let's say 3 years pass. They are organizing, debating, trying to get candidates on the ballot. So they have 7 years remaining on their official clock.
Okay.
If they have exactly 100 registered members in a specific district, how many votes do they need to get their deposit back?
We take the 100 members, and we multiply it by the 7 remaining years. So they must win exactly 700 votes in that district to get their money back.
Correct. But now, let's fast forward. The recycling initiative is struggling. It is now year 9 of their 10-year lifespan. They only have 1 year left on the clock. If they still have those same 100 members, what happens?
They take the 100 members, multiply it by the one remaining year. Now they only need 100 votes to get their deposit back. The required multiplier drops dramatically as they approach their expiration date.
Precisely. Now, consider the behavioral incentive this time trap creates for the founders at the very beginning. Human nature dictates that the founders will want to give themselves as much time as possible. They will want to declare a comfortable 30-year lifespan to guarantee their movement exists for decades, ensuring long-term relevance and steady income for the organizers.
Yeah.
But what happens to the math if they declare a 30-year lifespan?
If they have 100 members and 30 years remaining, 100 times 30 is 3,000 votes. By being greedy with time, they accidentally skyrocket the required multiplier, making it incredibly difficult to recover their financial deposits in the early elections. It is an elegant mathematical defense against the institutionalization of temporary causes.
Yes, it is.
It actively forces the founders to be realistic and efficient. They are structurally incentivized to declare the absolute shortest possible time frame necessary to achieve their goal. It pushes them to act emergently, to campaign fiercely, and to achieve their objective quickly, rather than comfortably dragging out their existence for 30 years.
It forces urgency through financial pressure. It is a masterpiece of systemic engineering. Finally, we need to examine the third and final pillar of this political architecture. We have parties, which seek to govern comprehensively. We have movements, which seek to accomplish single tasks. And now we look at political non-governmental organizations, or PNVOs.
Yeah.
These act as the crucial watchdogs of the entire system.
It is important to clarify the definition here because the term NGO is incredibly broad in everyday language. An NGO can encompass a local group advocating for better playground equipment, an international charity providing psychological support services to refugees, or a group organizing community theater. Professor Schenk is not talking about those. He is specifically defining political NGOs.
Yes, the focus is strictly on the political sphere. These are organizations that act exclusively as independent control bodies within the democratic process. The source materials mention regional examples like CRTA or CECID, which are renowned for monitoring elections, auditing campaign finances, and observing democratic processes to ensure fairness. They are the referees of the political game.
In this newly engineered system, these PNVOs are governed by a massive, strict firewall. Because their entire purpose is to monitor, audit, and control the political process, their members must be entirely legally untethered from the entities they are monitoring. The rules state that members of a PNVO are strictly forbidden from joining political parties.
Completely forbidden.
They are strictly forbidden from joining political movements. Furthermore, they are absolutely prohibited from running for seats in the parliament or seeking any executive office whatsoever.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you see the philosophical concept of the separation of powers being ruthlessly enforced at the grassroots citizen level. A citizen must deliberately choose their avenue of participation. You can seek broad power to enact comprehensive policy by joining a party. You can seek to achieve a specific targeted goal by joining a movement, or you can choose to stand outside the arena, monitor the actors, and ensure the absolute integrity of the system by joining a PNVO.
You have to choose your role.
You cannot do both. You cannot simultaneously play the game, score the points, and act as the referee blowing the whistle.
But wait, if I join a PNVO and I am forbidden from running for office or joining a party, what is the point? Am I just relegated to writing angry reports that the politicians will inevitably ignore? The PNVOs are not entirely removed from the actual mechanisms of state power, are they?
Not at all.
While they cannot hold executive or legislative power, the professor's blueprint assigns them a critical, highly systemic purpose. These watchdog organizations act as the exact talent pools used to indirectly nominate candidates for the control branch of the government.
The control branch is an essential, elevated concept here. In this proposed architecture, a healthy state relies on powerful, highly independent arbiters. Roles like chief state prosecutors, top-level Supreme Court judges, national ombudsmen, and electoral commissioners. These are positions that require deep, specialized expertise and an unimpeachable aura of independence. Rather than having the partisan politicians in the parliament directly appoint these critical control roles, which inevitably leads to partisan bias, backroom deals, and judges who owe favors to prime ministers, the system looks directly to the PNVOs.
So if the parliament needs a new chief prosecutor to investigate political corruption, they don't ask the ruling party for a candidate. They ask the political NGOs that specialize in legal oversight.
Correct. The specialized political NGOs who have proven their expertise over years of meticulously monitoring the state serve as the formal nominating bodies for these judicial and control positions. They provide a slate of highly qualified independent experts.
It creates a brilliant pathway for brilliant subject matter experts to enter the highest levels of public service without ever having to kiss the ring of a political party leader. However, the firewall remained completely intact even here. Let's say Citizen Sarah has been a leading lawyer at a powerful election monitoring PNVO for 10 years. She is nominated and successfully appointed to the control branch as a national judge. What happens to her PNVO membership?
The absolute moment she takes the oath as a judge, she must immediately resign from her NGO. She must sever all ties, friendships, and affiliations to maintain absolute, uncompromised independence in her new, powerful state role.
She stands alone.
She goes from being a monitor to being the law itself, and she must stand alone. And to ensure a broad, diverse base of expertise among these watchdogs, the rules state that a citizen can legally be a member of up to 3 different PNVOs simultaneously. This allows a passionate expert to monitor various sectors simultaneously. Perhaps they are a member of an NGO focused on election integrity, another focused on judicial fairness, and a third focused on media transparency.
Taking a step back from all the math and the individual rules, what we see here is stunning. When you combine the massive financial deposits, the brutal 15 times membership multiplier, the frozen legislative button, the time traps for single-issue movements, and the strict firewalls for the watchdog organizations, you are looking at a cohesive, beautifully engineered ecosystem.
It really is an ecosystem.
It treats political corruption, the trading of favors, the inefficiency of patronage, and the gridlock of modern democracy not as an incurable, tragic moral failing of the electorate, but as a highly predictable, mathematically inevitable outcome of poorly engineered systems.
It is a profound, optimistic shift in perspective. Instead of endlessly demanding better, more moral politicians, which history shows is a largely futile strategy, this blueprint demands a better machine. It utilizes mathematics, harsh financial realities, and inescapable negative feedback loops to constrain the darker angels of human nature and mechanically direct that energy toward constructive, transparent outcomes.
Yeah.
If the rules of the game make it highly profitable to hoard members and trade votes, people will rationally hoard members and trade votes. If the rules of the game make those exact behaviors financially ruinous and legally impossible, the behavior will stop immediately. The architecture, not the morality, dictates the outcome.
I want you, the listener, to pause and consider how these strict mathematical rules would alter the reality of your own local elections tomorrow. Imagine if the dominant, bloated political party in your city was suddenly forced to physically prove they had the votes to justify their massive membership lists, or risk losing millions in deposits. Imagine if your local representatives permanently lost their voting power the absolute moment they defected to a rival faction.
Everything would change.
Imagine how quickly the political landscape would transform from a game of patronage into a genuine contest of ideas.
It forces us to look beyond the daily rhetoric, the television debates, and the partisan anger, and to rigorously examine the underlying machinery that governs our lives.
We will leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day. If human behavior in politics is fundamentally driven by the structural rules of the game, as Professor Senk's blueprint suggests, what specific invisible rule in your own local political system is currently incentivizing the behavior you dislike the most? What is the hidden mathematical feedback loop rewarding the very corruption you wish to eliminate? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We look forward to exploring the hidden mechanics of the world with you again soon.